The time has come to lift the veil. Coom Ministries presents Unveiling the Threat of Islamic Extremism. Welcome to Session 6, the Global Islamic Invasion. Is Islam on its way to becoming a dominant global power? Or is it beginning to crumble from within? In this session, Kamal Salim and retired Lieutenant General Jerry Boygan investigate these disturbing and controversial questions.
General Jerry, is Islam becoming the center power of the Western civilization, including United States of America, or is Islam crumbling from within?
Well, first of all, Islam is dominating most of Europe. It's also dominating much of Asia. Remember, the largest Muslim population in the world is actually in Indonesia. Mm-hmm. And then you have Malaysia and so forth. And then Islam is still on the rise in America and becoming more and more dangerous every day. At the same time, there are challenges within Islam itself, because what you're seeing, for example, in places like Iran, is you're seeing a growing underground Christian church, born-again believers that are growing by the day. Many Muslims are coming to Christ. And as our good friend Tom Doyle is so articulate in explaining, many of them are coming to Christ not because a missionary came to them, but because Christ came to them in a vision or a dream. So that's presenting a challenge for Islam. It's presenting a challenge for some of the governments over there, where the underground church of born-again believers is growing, and it's really starting to stress the governments there as this body of believers is expanding every day, and they don't know what to do with them. And in the case of Iran, they chase them and try to kill them. So yes, Islam has its own challenges, and at the same time, there are places where Islam has simply failed, like Egypt. Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, they took over. They started to implement Sharia in its purest form, the same thing that they had in Afghanistan.
Correct.
On 9/11, and the people now have rejected it. And so it's had its setbacks too. The one setback that everybody's aware of is the death of Osama bin Laden, who was sort of the theological leader of certain radical elements like Al-Qaeda in the Islamic world, but that was only a temporary setback. That it has no lasting impact. So at the same time that it is still on the rise, that it is still starting to dominate certain parts of the world, it is being challenged from within by its own people.
That's right. And we are seeing, the example that you had, it was perfect example. In Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, dominated, and then the killing of Christians in the street, the burning of the churches, the burning of the Christian businesses, the raping of the Muslim women that protested on the street that they don't want Islamist government. The Muslim Brotherhood released a fatwa, and they were raping them in the street publicly. Right. And then we had, Azhar al-Sharif declare war on the Egyptian people and, on the the Egyptian military, because the people, over 20 million people, marched in the street, and they said, we don't want radical Islam in Egypt. And so now we look at all this and we see that the people are speaking for themselves in Egypt, and we saw the fail of Islam. Then we see we see now in Iran, Tehran, we see that the government, the Ayatollah, the Khomeini, are only about near 6%, the Islamist, but yet they're dominating the Muslims the Muslim people in Iran. And what we're finding in Iran, that a lot of the Iranian people, they are very open to the gospel of Christianity, right, and other things, but they don't want radical Islam nation, because under the Shah, right, they were like a part of the European culture world, and Iran was beautiful, but all of a sudden the radical Islam came, and the fall of Iran, it became a desert, and became, now if you speak about one thing or another, you're thrown in jail. There are more Iranian people in jail system than any other nations, you know, as we know right now in modern 21st century. General Jerry, you spoke about the Western civilization, you know, being challenged. Right. Now we hear about Europe invasion, and we hear that Europe is declining from Christian culture to secular culture to Islamic culture. Right. Can you inform us on this?
Yeah, I think Europe is an interesting case study, particularly for America, because we're maybe only a decade or less behind Europe in terms of where we're going. Remember that during the days of the Ottoman Empire, the great hope of Islam was the ultimate establishment of the caliphate.
Correct.
And the Ottoman Empire was going to establish the caliphate. And they got to the gates of Vienna twice and were turned back by the armies and navies of Europe. And ultimately that resulted after World War I in the total destruction of the Ottoman Empire. But they never really gave up on this conquest to capture Europe as sort of the centerpiece of the caliphate. But they decided they'd do it a different way. They would infiltrate it and then take it over from within. That's exactly what they're doing in America. They are infiltrating America to take over from within. So it's no longer a matter of being able to generate a great enough military force that they can take it by force. They'll take it from within. Now what's happening in Europe, because they're moving away from their Christian values and the values upon which all of Europe was founded, which were Judeo-Christian values, they have become already a secular continent. The Muslims are pouring in out of the Middle East because while they became secular, they became socialist. So they have these huge bills to pay for people that, for example, retire at 52 or 53 years old, and they live another 30 years, and somebody has to pay their pension, somebody has to pay their benefits, and that means the next generation is going to pay these huge bills that are coming due. The problem is the birth rates in Europe are so low among native Europeans that there is no next generation. The birth rate on the whole continent is just a little over 1.3, and it takes a 2.1 to repopulate a society.
That's right.
So now with the birth rate on the whole continent, about 1.35 or something like that, there's no next generation. So where do you get the people that are going to pay those bills that are coming due?
They're declining.
You bring them in from other countries. You bring in immigrants. Well, in the case of Europe, where do the immigrants come from? They come out of the Middle East and North Africa. And what are they? They're all Muslims. Well, this is great for the Muslim Brotherhood. This is great for the hardcore Islamists because that's exactly what they want to do. They want to infiltrate Europe and then take over from within. And now look at what they've done. Their birth rate, by the way, when they get to Europe is 5.6. So if you read what the experts say about just the mathematics of this situation, by the middle of this century, the whole continent of Europe will be dominated by Islam just based on birth rates.
That's right.
The Muslims they call it jihad of the womb.
That's right. You know, in France itself, the birth rate of the Muslim is 8.1. You know, it exceeds all other Europe. Tell us a little bit about France. So we hear that several territories are no longer led by the French police, French army, that we hear that Sharia law becoming center, Islamic law becoming center, and now non-Muslim are prohibited from coming in.
Yeah, there are about 750 areas. It's actually a little more than that, I think, in France, in different parts of France, that have been declared Sharia zones, which means a police or a firefighter or a first responder cannot go into those zones there without the approval of the imam. Now think about this. France is a democracy. France is a representative government. But now you have imams that are in positions to say, this is my territory. I'm responsible for this, and you can't come in unless you have my permission. Well, the same thing is happening in England, and it's even worse in England because you now have about 85 Sharia courts in England.
Their Supreme Court, they're equal to the English court, aren't they?
Outside of the British legal system, where the British citizens, Muslims, are going to Sharia courts where an imam adjudicates the case according to Islamic law or Sharia. That's now in America, that's exactly what they'd like to have in America. And it's a violation of Article 6 of the United States Constitution, which says the Constitution is the supreme law of the land.
That's right.
But you're seeing this all over Europe, and you're seeing them in the legislatures now. And by being in the legislatures, they now have an opportunity to influence the laws that are passed in those nations, and the laws that they are interested in passing are laws that protect the Muslim population there, or that give special rights and privileges to the Muslim population. So look at the fact that it won't even be the middle of the century before a couple of those countries are going to become dominated by Islam. Belgium is probably one of the first. Denmark is another. The Netherlands is another one. And by the way, probably the most popular politician in Europe today is a guy named Geert Wilders.
That's right.
Who is a member of the Dutch Parliament, who has now stood up and said very boldly and very clearly that we are soon going to lose our culture and our country to these Islamic invaders. This is not an immigration issue. This is about evil coming into an environment where there, at least initially, was based on Judeo-Christian principles, and now we have evil coming in that wants to bring Sharia. And Geert Wilders has been warning people of that, and he's been taken to trial by an international court for hate crimes. He's been threatened. He's been ridiculed. They've denied him access into Britain. They've actually canceled speaking engagements for him here in America because he is so controversial, because he's standing up and telling people exactly what the threat is. He's a very brave man.
But we see what he was capable of doing as the good fight that he fought, and it reminded me of the Tea Party in the United States of America, the way he's standing.
Right.
And, you know, they killed some of his predecessor. You know, we remember the guy who spoke against the cartoon, Muhammad cartoon, the prophet of Islam. And they stabbed him and killed him right on the street, and the others beheading. And we saw that happening over there, to the point that the Danish government, you know, Denmark, is so social, but they find that the socialism and the Islamic socialism, they do not equal each other. One of them bring the demise of the nation, and one bring, you know, the constitution to advance the nation. To the point that the Danish government, Denmark government, changed their constitution for the first time in history. And now they are no longer, their history, it says, if you want to live in our country, you have to abide in our constitution. That's number one. Number two, you could not come and start changing and bring your laws and bylaws, because our laws are the statute, you know, of our nation. You must learn English. You must learn Danish to speak like anybody else. You could not live in the free areas, you know, collect food, you know, stamps, live in a free housing, get free education, free, you know, transportation, free everything. So they put this, if you want to live in this country, you must be able to provide for your own self, because the country is about to bankrupt. And so what happened, they said, in the event that you fail to do any of these things, we'll be glad to buy you a ticket to your country where you can practice what you want to practice freely. You know, so I saw what he did, and I saw how he helped change his government. So really it helped to find somebody, even in the United States of America, to stand against this creeping Sharia, creeping Islam, Islamism, you know, the radical Islam, to change, that wanted to change our culture.
But generally speaking, the governments of Europe have not faced up to the realities of it. They're losing their culture, they're losing their countries, and again, by the middle of the century, the continent will be dominated by Islam. And now I think it's too late for them to even reverse that. I think they're going to lose their continent.
The Chancellor of Germany, she said it's a matter of time before Germany becomes a Muslim nation. because just by birth, like you were talking about jihad, birth of womb, by itself is changing the German culture to the point that German could not exercise their freedom. We see a huge exodus from France and Germany, Jewish citizen of France, Jewish citizen of Germany. Why is this happening? Why all of a sudden we're seeing, French Jews, German Jews moving to Israel? Why their government is not stopping and telling them, like, don't leave? Or is the government doing anything?
Well, it's just what we've been talking about. What they see, remember that every Jew, first and foremost in their mind is the Holocaust and the death of 6 million Jews on the continent of Europe. And now they see the Islamic takeover of the continent. They see that it is just as dangerous as Hitler was, because they know they're a target. Mm-hmm. They're a target in Israel, for that matter, but they know they're a target, and I think that they are seeing that it's time to leave. It's time to go back to the one place in the world where they feel safe, and that's Israel. And that's what's happening. There's a mass migration now out of Europe of Jews returning to Israel. In reality, probably the safest place in the world for them right now is America.
And there's a massive exodus from Middle East and Europe coming to United States of America, even of Islam, immigration, in political asylum. Is this... I heard that they refer to these people as OTM, who are these people? Why they are coming to United States of America and seeking political asylum?
Well, many of them were invited to come to America by the administration of Barack Obama. Remember, there was a short conflict in the Gaza Strip where the Israelis had to go into the Gaza Strip and clean out some of the pockets of terrorists in there. And as a result of that, the Obama administration offered thousands of them asylum in the United States, and even paid to bring them to the U.S., and also provided money to the government in Gaza, and that's the government of Hamas, which is listed as a terrorist organization. So they've been invited to come in many cases. Now, based on the way our immigration laws work, once you get here and you get well established, you can bring your family with you. And so there are many of them pouring in here. Many of them are coming in illegally. And I think one of the things that I'm most concerned about, Kamal, is something that has been obscured, that most Americans are not aware of this, is that there are sectors of our border, our U.S. border, particularly down in the Tucson sector with Mexico, where we know that these OTMs, as you referred to them, other than Mexican is what it stands for, we know that many of them are coming out of the Middle East. We also know unequivocally that many of them are associated with Hamas, Hezbollah, and Al-Qaeda. They're terrorists.
Correct.
And we also know that they are, in some cases, bringing things across that border which are potentially very, very dangerous and lethal to the American public.
And there were a movie done on this.
Oh, that's right, exactly. And in fact, all you have to do is go to YouTube and look up 4 pounds of anthrax and watch the Muslim cleric as he...
The Kuwaiti.
As he explains, with 4 pounds of anthrax smuggled out of Mexico through a tunnel into the United States, we can kill tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And he goes through the whole scenario.
Yeah, so he said, why hit the buildings with the airplane, and kill 3,000 people where you can kill 300,000 by 4 pounds of anthrax on the White House, front lawn.
Right.
Word for word.
So they're coming across our southern border, and some are coming across our northern border with Canada, and we know that, but there's no effort whatsoever to seal the border, to stop them, and they're coming into America legally and illegally with nefarious purposes. Now let me go back and say, most of the Muslims in America are not a threat. but you never hear from the Muslims in America because they don't have a voice, because they're dominated by the voice of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is here for a single purpose, that is to destroy the government of America and to rebuild it as an Islamic nation. And they are, right now, they are well on their way to doing that, and I know that's hard for people to believe, but that's because they are very good at what they do, and most Americans don't really know the influence or the impact that they're having in America today.
Yes, it's becoming critical for America to wake up. In general terms, is America in its Arab Springs? And if it's so, explain to us. Give us an example.
Well, I think what's happening in America today is not a good parallel to the Arab Spring, but you have to look on the horizon and say that may be coming. Now, you are seeing some parallels. You're seeing, for example, Muslims talking about a 1 million man march on the anniversary of 9/11, a 1 million man march.
Against fear.
For what purpose? I mean, why would you do that? You know very well, Kamal, for example, in Dearborn, Michigan, where the extremist elements of Islam have actually taken over in Dearborn, Michigan. There was a case of some Christians that were 2 blocks away from an Arab festival handing out Bible tracts, as they are allowed to do by our Constitution, and the Christians were arrested by the police. And then a situation that's very familiar to you up in the Dearborn area, where you were asked to come and speak at a public event.
Yes.
And your event was protested.
Yes. Well, I was asked to speak, and it was high school. And when I arrived at a high school, just as I started to speak, the chief police came and he stopped the speaking engagement. He asked us to shut down right away, and he came against the freedom of speech, our Constitution, and even came against the Bill of Rights.
And no one had to come to this event. It was open to the public, but no one had to come.
That's correct.
Right.
And the unfortunate thing is we had a House Representative, David Ijema. He was there with us, and we have city councils, and we have other House speakers there in the speaking engagement, where I'm speaking. And they want to speak to the police chief. He said, I don't care what your credential is. He said, I'm exercising my power to shut this down. So David Hijama asked him, why are you doing this? He said, we had threat that if you speak, something may happen here by the Muslim Brotherhood, by CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations. So they shut down, the whole thing. And we see them trying to do this, like at the Air Force Academy, another example, at different universities where we used to speak. We used to train the American, the CIA, the FBI, the national security. We used to train the homeland. All of a sudden, we are not allowed to those places, and now we are, the corrupt people, and the Muslim Brotherhood are the good people, and they are the one who are training in the inside now.
Well, I think that it's also important for people to understand that our government has shown no willingness nor propensity for facing up to the realities of the threat. And they have consequently been unwilling to try and stop what the Muslim Brotherhood is doing in America. Kamal, a great example of that is in 2012, on the 8th of February, at the direction of Robert Mueller, the FBI director.
Director, yes.
He allowed 3 or 4 different Islamic groups headed by the Islamic Society of North America, which is a front for the Muslim Brotherhood. He allowed them to come in and look at the curriculum that was being used to train FBI agents and federal law enforcement to deal with terrorism. Mm-hmm. He said, take a look at our curriculum here. They went through the curriculum, and they told Mueller to take 1,000 pages out of that curriculum. Well, someone called me about it, and I called Representative Michelle Bachmann from the state of Minnesota, mm-hmm. and asked her if she was aware that they had expunged 1,000 pages, and she said no, she was not, but she would look into it. And I met with her later, and she went over and looked at it, and she said every bit of it was out of the Quran. And she asked them, why did you take this out? It's out of the Quran. This is word for word from the Quran. She said they had no answers. And she said, furthermore, they allowed the Islamic Society of North America and these other front groups to determine who would teach the FBI in the future. Who would be allowed to teach them?
The fox in the hen house.
That's exactly what it is. So then you look at the bombing.
This question here, we are not with, with war with Islam. We are not at war with Islam. But yet we see two brothers out of Boston coming together and ambush us in the middle of a race, an event that the American people celebrating, something good in history and time. Are we at war with Islam? And if that's what's happening in the mosque in the United States of America, are the mosque, places, are they really teaching the Muslim not to hurt the American people, to love on American people, can you enlighten us, General Jerry?
Yeah, I tell you, that's a great question. The 80% of the mosques in America are funded by extremist organizations primarily out of the Persian Gulf. Mostly Saudi money, UAE money.
Wahhabi.
The Wahhabis, yeah. So those mosques are founded. Now, why would they found mosques? Why would they pay to erect mosque unless they were going to use those? Now, you've taught me something very important in our years together. You've taught me that a mosque in America or anywhere in the world should be looked at more as an embassy. Well, this is hard for Americans to understand because they still think of a mosque as a church. But when you recognize that, again, let's go back to the fundamentals. Those that are serving Islam in the purest sense, doing what the Quran says, they don't recognize the sovereignty of any single nation. Their allegiance is to the global caliphate. Their allegiance is to Islam, which provides them with a caliphate to which they can show their allegiance. That said, so how could you call a mosque an embassy? Well, the mosque is the embassy of that caliphate because they don't recognize the sovereignty. That's why Nadal Hassan said in his own court appearance that his allegiance is not to the Constitution of the United States. That's why when people bomb the subways in London and everybody says, but they were born in Britain, how could they possibly have an allegiance to Pakistan? And the answer is they don't. It's not Pakistan, it's not Britain, it's the caliphate, it's Islam. So these mosques are put there primarily as embassies from which they can influence the parishioners.
Islam is a nation.
Islam is a nation.
Basically, you can be an American Muslim and your allegiance is not to America. Your allegiance is to Islam because you are worshipped as a Muslim. So when you have the head of the CIA is a Muslim, and so you'll find out that his allegiance is to Islam. That's why he did not swear on a Bible, so therefore what happened is what we're looking at is the Muslim loyalty is to their nation, to abide in Allah. And this is what we refer to as Ummah.
Right.
And Ummah means a whole world order under Allah. And so therefore what happened is the statistic was done by the Pew. A very small percentage of American Muslims, they said we are American and we are Muslims. Right. But the majority of the American Muslims in America, they said we are Muslim first and we are American second. And when a mosque is open in any place in the world, what happened is the ground are already sanctified and consecrated by 4 blocks from each direction of the mosque. And this becomes a holy land. This is why the Muslim, start congregating around the mosque. And we are seeing, now that, for example, let's take England, Anjamin Chowdhury, You know Anjem Chowdhury. I debated him several times on TV, and I don't debate for a debate, but he said it's matter of time before we take over the world.
That's right.
He said, we are the answer to homosexuality. We are the answer to, abortion. We are the answer to the failing Constitution American civilization. We are the answer to everything that America has failed to. And Islam will be the center of America. If not now, then in 100 years it will be. It's a matter of time. And Anjem Chowdhury and his people, they take over
By the way, I think we need to be clear. He lives in Britain, and he is a firebrand cleric that has very openly said that his objective is to bring Sharia to the whole world.
That's correct. That's
ahead.
correct. So basically what you said on France, there are a multitude of areas in England. I can't remember the number, but they are increasing, that these areas are at nighttime, they are Muslim territory that the English police and army could not enter. And we've seen them that they're invading the UK civilization and refer to it as UK Abad. And what happened is, in the UK, you can speak as a Muslim. You can be a Muslim, but if you're a Christian and you speak against Islam, you're arrested, you're thrown in jail, and you're fined. And this is called the hate crime bill. And they're about to implement this in the United States of America. Hillary Clinton was about to put this in place, and she was working with the OIC.
Right. That's right. And the OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference, is a 57-state organization globally that wants to make the concept of hate crimes really mean disparaging Islam.
Led by Turkey.
Led by Turkey.
By Erdogan.
Recep Erdogan. He is the president of Turkey. He's right in the middle of this. And they want to make it so that anywhere on the globe, if you say anything critical of the Prophet or of Islam in general, what many would say we've been doing in your program, or if you make a video or you in any way slander Islam, that it's a global crime and you're subject to international punishment.
Last year, our President Obama said that in the United Nations. He said, if you come against Islam or Muhammad, you are not accepted from, he literally voiced that in the United Nations in his speech.
Now think about this. Last year there was a art exhibit, I believe it was up in either Philadelphia or New York, with a cross with Christ in a big container of urine, and that was considered to be art. It very much disparages our faith. It very much is critical of our faith, but it was considered art. What if that had been the Prophet Muhammad in that? What would the U.S. leadership have done? The answer is whoever put it there would have been taken to task and punished for it and held under hate crimes legislation. There's a huge double standard. I guess my point is, wake up, America. Yes. Wake up and see what's happening to this country. Or you can just sit back and watch as this continues to unfold.
We hear that Islam is religion of peace. And we hear that the Jews and the Christians and Islam worship the same God. And we need to know, how could the church educate itself about the whole truth? Number one, do we worship the same God? And when the Muslims saying we worship the same God, is that a fact? And if it's not, then what's the differences between the two gods? And then also, is this part of the invasion to our Christian churches, to our synagogue, to our very fiber of this nation?
This concept of Chrislam, Christianity and Islam all worship the same God, we bring the two faiths together, is absolutely an infiltration by the Muslim Brotherhood. We don't worship the same God. The Jesus of the Bible and the Jesus of the Quran are two totally different people. Jesus of the Bible was the Son of God, born of a virgin, went to Calvary and died that we might be redeemed if we would accept Him as our personal Savior. The Jesus of the Quran is a prophet who will eventually come back to reign as a subordinate of the Islamic Messiah. That's not the same God, not the same God at all. Now, this is also taqiyya, which we talked about earlier, lying to protect or further the faith,
advance, yes.
which is taught in Islam. You are compelled to lie when it will protect your faith. You're compelled to lie when it will further your faith. And lying by saying we all worship the same God, there's no Muslim that, being honest with you, would say, yeah, we worship your God too. That's not true. And they're offended by that, other than when they say that as part of the taqiyya, or the concept of lying to further their faith.
You know, in my learning, you know, when I came to Christ, you know, crossing over from the Muslim Brotherhood and being active member of the PLO, coming to the United States for infiltration of civilization, jihad, to change the culture from within. You know about my story. I got in a car wreck and I met some Christian family, and I came to know the difference between Christianity and Islam. But in my epiphany, I started measuring the difference between the two, that the God of Islam, Allah, and the God of the Christian and Jews, Jehovah God Almighty, the difference between the two is this God here, so he so loved the world. This God here, so in the hadith, in the tradition of Islam, says if the whole world worth a net leg to him, he'd have destroyed the world time and time again, but it's worth nothing to him. Right. So therefore, it is not important to him. So the people of Islam, they are slave to Allah. You know, in order to accept Islam, you are a slave of Allah. While here, in order to accept Christianity, you are the son of God, the daughter of God. Right. This guy gave his son. He so loved the world that he gave his son. This son here brought about a special spirit. It's called spirit of adoption. And this man, he brought something to bring the people to graft them into the tree of life, into the living God. So they may have fortune, they may have to be co-inheritor with the Jews. Right. While this one here had an orphan, his name was Muhammad. Muhammad took the people and he took them from adoption, and now he took them back into the law, which is they are no longer free to worship what they want, but they are condemned by the law, and now that became the opposite spirit of adoption, and it started taking to, you know, and in Islam, you know, adoption is illegal. You could not adopt anyone. Why? Because Muhammad took the Prophet of Islam took his adopted son, wife, as a wife. He took her on. So Allah spoke for Muhammad. He said, there's no adoption in Islam. So what happened, it's an orphan spirit. Right. This one gave his life. This one took life. Over 270 million people's life has been taken since Islam birthed.
Many of which were other Muslims.
Islam kill more Islam than they, than they kill anything else. Right. This one gave his blood. This one took blood. You know, and it goes on and on and on. Right. So when I weighed all those, I saw this one here he is serving me, and this one I am serving him. Right. This one is trying to give me hope and a future. This one's trying to tell me that nothing is good enough for him. Right. This is how I learned about this. Right. The mosques in the United States of America, you know, we see the Zarnavan brothers, you know, they became radicals. These were not radical. They were on the FBI list at one time that they were not, you know, and all of a sudden they did what they did. They went to Russia Minor. They went, you know, to East Europe. They learned how to do what they have to do and came back. Were they recruited in a mosque? Did this mosque in Boston and other mosques in the United States of America, like Nidal, you know, Hassan Nidal, the Fort Hood bomber, or whomever, you know, what we see those people rising, or the New York bomber, you know, the one who want to bomb New York, were they recruited in the mosque here and sent overseas and came back to do missions?
Well, yes, and it's interesting that the mosque that they came from was actually partially funded by the city of Boston. But they were radicalized in that mosque, and then they went back into Central Asia and were further radicalized, and then they came back with a nefarious plan, and they executed it at the Boston Marathon. But it's, again, this goes back to something that I was saying earlier. You ask yourself why the FBI did not stop them.
Good question.
They were clearly dangerous. But the FBI didn't do anything, and I would submit to you that that is because our FBI, our federal law enforcement, is not allowed to know who the enemy is. They're not allowed to know the enemy's tactics, the enemy's motives, the enemy's objectives. They're not allowed to by this administration. And that's why I was saying they expunged 1,000 pages from the training material that was used to train these FBI agents to be able to deal with this. I'll give you an example. In 2009, right before Nadal Hassan killed the people at Fort Hood, I talked to some people in law enforcement who told me that there was a new directive out of Eric Holder's office called the Domestic Investigations and Operations Guidelines, which said when you are investigating terrorism, you may not investigate suspicious activity. Now, every decent law enforcement investigator uses suspicious activity as a major foundation for their investigations. But when it comes to terrorism, you can't investigate domestic activity. So, Nadal Hassan, I met with members of the Intel Committee in the House of Representatives to tell them about this, and they didn't even know about it. And they eventually, while I was sitting there with them, they discovered that, yes, there was a memo out of Eric Holder's office that said you can't investigate suspicious activity when it's associated with terrorism. And then it was the very next week that Nadal Hassan walked in yelling, Allahu Akbar, and killed 13 people. I say 14 because one of the women was pregnant, and wounded another 30 as he yelled, Allahu Akbar. And when they went back and investigated him, they found out that they had somewhere between 14 and 19 emails that he had with Anwar al-Awlaki, a radical terrorist that actually grew up in New Mexico.
Who spoke at Boston Mosque, the same,
Right. And he was, by the way, he was the imam at the mosque where Nadal Hassan was radicalized.
That's right.
Up and outside of our nation's capital in Virginia. But they had these emails, and the FBI knew about these emails, and they did not investigate it because it was suspicious activity. We're not safer today because of this, because the FBI and other law enforcement are not being allowed to know who the enemy is, and when they do know, they're not being allowed to do anything about it. Now, we've had some good things happen. We've had some breakthroughs. We've stopped terrorist plots. But overall, they've done that in spite of the restrictions placed on them, not because of the support that they've been getting.
This is a critical time for our American people to know who to vote for. And the Word of God said that you will know them by their fruit.
Right.
See their action. Don't listen to their word. Listen to see what they've done. It's very important time for the American people to be involved, especially the church, to rise up and start voting for change. Instead of sitting on the side. Statistics shows that the majority of the church did not vote.
That's right.
They set aside. It's shame that when the church doesn't know up from down.
Right.
I want to ask one more question. And that question is, we have established that many mosques have been radicalized moderate Muslims here in the United States of America.
Right.
And we're seeing a lot of, people, American people, they don't know the difference between a radical Muslim and a moderate Muslim. What's the difference between the two? Did they worship the same God? Did they believe in the same theology? And which one should they trust and which one should they not trust? And how can you tell?
Yeah.
This is a big question.
I think it is, and I think you're better equipped to answer it than me, but I'll say this. I still believe that the majority of the Muslims in America, in fact, the majority of the Muslims in the world, do not want to live under Sharia.
I agree.
So if you look at the Muslims in this country, those that reject Sharia are very silent because they're scared, they're intimidated. They don't want to speak out because they know
They have family.
that they have family, and many of their family are still in the countries they came from. So they don't want to speak out, and they don't want to be identified as rejecting the teachings of the Muslim Brotherhood and the extremist elements, which are very dangerous. So they don't speak out. They don't have a voice, but they don't want to live under Sharia. And the reality is, when you talk to a Muslim and you say, do you want to see Sharia in America? If they say, for example, well, there are many interpretations of Sharia, then they're probably a radical. They're probably a radical because they know what Sharia is. They know Sharia will kill the apostate, someone that leaves Islam. They know that it subordinates women to men. On the other hand, if they say, no, I don't want to live under Sharia, they are probably one of those Muslims that you ought to be appealing to. You ought to be trying to figure out a way to come along beside them and work with them. If you go to an imam and you say to him, will you openly reject Sharia? And he says no, then I wouldn't waste any more time with him. But you're probably in a better position to tell me, how do you tell whether a Muslim in America, let's talk about America. What about in America? How do you know if they're radical?
The influx has changed, since the Islamic immigration has been accelerating in the United States of America. And our current administration has allowed more immigration of Muslims, including Islamists, to this nation, from Iran, from, all over the Islamic world. And we are seeing millions, of students coming from overseas to study, throughout time and history. And a lot of them are getting married to an American woman specifically to obtain the American citizenship, which is part of our training. But there are two kinds of Muslims. They are the third kind, which is not talking, is like you qualified them. They are scared, they are filled with fear, and they are not sure, what to do about this, because at the end of the day, they want to better their life and their standard of living. So therefore, they're trying to make their children better. These are, providers. They have good jobs. They have good living. But how do we know the radical from non-radical? When you hear somebody wants Sharia law in the United States of America, you know that they are radical, because the first thing, when you cross the United States and accept the American citizen, you accept the Constitution as the law and the bylaw. So there, if you say you want Sharia law, then you have defaulted and you have broken the oath and the promise that you took that American citizenship. And by that standard, you are saying, I lied, and I did not want to be in your nation and be part of your nation. I want to be against you. So therefore, there should be a measuring stick, that everybody measure up to this, if you want to be part of this civilization or not.
Right.
Now,
well, I think it's important too, Kamal, that we recognize that many Muslims came here to get away from Sharia.
That's right.
But it's also important to recognize that many of them don't really know what Sharia is.
That's so true.
And that's the example of that is what happened in Egypt. When they polls from Pew Research showed that over 80% of the people before Mohammed Morsi came to power wanted Sharia to be the central part of their government. They wanted the Quran to be the Constitution. But once they found out what it really was, and these were Muslims that had been living in basically an Islamic country, but they didn't really know what Sharia was until it was implemented, until Mohammed Morsi began to implement it, and then they realized just how brutal it was. They realized just what it did to women, what it did to, to the general population.
The Saudi Arabian government, when Barack Hussein Obama said to the new Egyptian government, by the people, of the people, for the people, decided that that's their new government, what happened? He said, I'm not going to give you the $1.6 billion. Therefore, we saw Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, not Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. They send them $10 billion to tell them, you don't need any, somebody tell you how to live your life. Because we see in Islam right now is really, I believe, is Islam crumbling from within. And we're talking about that jihad, eternal struggle, but Islam has never been defined. What is true Islam? That's why they have Sharia. That's why they have Shura. Shura is, imams from all over coming to agree to something to declare a fatwa, which is a judgment. In Iran, on the other hand, we found out specifically the opposite. The Iranian people are not an Arabs. The invasion of the Islam changed their culture. Many of the Iranian people don't want Sharia. They don't want to read the Quran because it's in Arabic. None of them read Arabic. They are Farsis. They are Persian. They are, educated for century, and now Islam tell them how to live their life and change their world under the Khomeinis, the Ayatollahs. And what happened is their life is upside down. Now they have to live in secrecy versus liberty, what they used to live before. I want to thank you for listening to us. General Jerry, may God bless you, and may God keep you, and may God shine his face upon you.
Amen.
Thank you for watching this session of Unveiling the Threat of Islamic Extremism. Unveiling was produced by Coom Ministries. The mission of Coom Ministries is to educate the Christian and Jewish communities about the impending dangers of radical Islam and to reach Muslims with the redemptive message of Christ. To learn more about Kamal Salim and the work of Coom Ministries, or to access additional resources concerning Islamic extremism, go to coomministries.com.